Emma's presentation to the full Oak Island team lasted 4 hours. She had prepared it with the thoroughness of someone presenting a doctoral dissertation, not because she was performing for television, but because she understood that what she was claiming was extraordinary, and extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence. And she was not going to stand in front of serious people and tell them she knew the exact location of a $400 million treasure without showing every step of the reasoning that had produced that conclusion. Rick and Marty Lagina sat at the conference table with their senior team, the engineers, the geologists, the archaeologists, the historical consultant who had found Emma's paper. Outside, the island waited under the gray Nova Scotia sky, the same patient, secretive presence it had always been. Emma began not with the conclusion, but with the framework. The Templars, she said, understood something that most people don't appreciate about concealment. The biggest vulnerability of any hidden deposit isn't the physical security of the hiding place. It's the location information itself, the knowledge of where something is hidden. If that knowledge exists in a single place, a single document, a single person's memory, then the deposit is only as secure as that single point of vulnerability. She paused, letting the logic settle. Their solution was distribution. They encoded location information across multiple independent channels in a form where each channel was individually meaningless, but collectively precise. To find the deposit, you had to have access to all the channels and the interpretive framework to synthesize them. Destroy any single channel and the system still works. Destroy any two and it still works. You had to destroy almost everything to make the location truly unrecoverable. Marty leaned forward. And you're saying Oak Island uses this system? I'm saying Oak Island is the most complete example of this system I have ever documented, Emma replied, and I've spent 15 years looking at European examples. She walked them through the elements one by one. The first channel was astronomical. The original money pit, Emma explained, was not positioned randomly. Its placement on Oak Island corresponded to a specific astronomical alignment. A sight line from the pit's center to the rising point of a specific star on a specific date corresponded to a date of known significance in the Templar calendar. The alignment had been noted by previous researchers, but dismissed as coincidence. In the context of Templar navigational cryptography, it wasn't a coincidence. It was the first coordinate in a multi-channel system. The room was quiet as Emma moved to the second element. The cipher stone, discovered at 90 feet in the original 1795 excavation and subsequently lost, surviving only in 19th century copies, had been interpreted for 2 centuries as a message about treasure depth and quantity. Emma had approached it differently, running it through the specific cipher variant her research had identified as Templar in origin. She produced not a message about quantity, but a directional instruction, a bearing from the money pit center to the actual deposit location. The bearing, combined with the astronomical alignment, began to define a search cone, but it wasn't specific enough yet. The system had more elements. The third element came from the island's physical modifications, the flood tunnel system. Every previous analysis of the flood tunnels had approached them purely as a security mechanism. Emma had mapped their geometry and found something no previous analysis had identified. The tunnel configuration viewed from above was not random. The angles and intersections of the flood tunnel network encoded a distance measurement, the number of links in the Templar unit of measurement, from the money pit center to the deposit location along the bearing defined by the cipher stone. So the flood tunnels aren't just protection, Rick said, his voice careful. They're also a map. They're also a map, Emma confirmed. The people who built the flood tunnel system built the map into the geometry of the tunnels themselves. It's been sitting there for centuries in plain sight, and nobody recognized it because nobody was looking for it. The fourth element was architectural. The team's own work in previous seasons had documented stone triangle formations on the island's surface, arrangements of stones that had been interpreted as survey markers by previous researchers. Emma's analysis showed they were more than that. They were reference points that combined with the astronomical alignment, the cipher bearing, and the tunnel distance measurement triangulated to a specific point. One specific point, not a zone, not an area, a point expressed with a precision that reflected the engineering capability of people who had built one of the most sophisticated hydraulic security systems ever constructed for the purpose of protecting what they were hiding. Emma put the final map on the table. The point was not in the money pit. It was not where any previous excavation had focused. It was 63 feet northeast of the primary shaft center, at a depth the team's geological data suggested was between 95 and 110 feet, a location that had been peripheral to the main search area for 13 seasons, noted but never prioritized because nothing had specifically indicated it as primary. The room was silent for a long time. The team's lead engineer leaned over the map. He pulled out his own data, the GPR surveys, the seismic analysis, the borehole records. He cross-referenced Emma's location against the team's accumulated subsurface imaging. He looked up slowly. "There's an anomaly here," he said, pointing to Emma's marked location on his own data set. "We've had it in our data for 2 seasons. We classified it as secondary, not the target, but it's there. It's real." He paused. "This is consistent with a constructed void at this location and depth." Emma nodded without surprise. She had reviewed the team's data before making her presentation. She already knew the anomaly was there. The navigational system, she said, points to that anomaly. The anomaly is consistent with the physical characteristics of a Templar vault based on every comparable European example I've documented. She looked around the table. The location is confirmed by 4 independent channels of information synthesized through a framework that the organization that built this system specifically designed to require expert interpretation. She paused. They built it so that only someone who understood what they were looking for would ever find it. They weren't trying to hide it forever. They were trying to until someone capable of understanding its significance came along to receive it. Rick Lagina, who had been silent through most of the presentation, spoke for the first time in over an hour. "How confident are you?" he asked. Emma looked at him directly. "In 15 years of working with Templar navigational cryptography, I have never seen a more complete or more precisely preserved example of this system. The 4 channels are each independently authenticated. Their synthesis produces a single, unambiguous location." She paused. "I am as confident as my methodology allows me to be, which is very confident." The room processed this in silence. Marty looked at his brother. Rick was still looking at the map at the single point that Emma's 4-channel analysis had identified 63 feet northeast of where they'd been digging for 13 seasons. "When can we drill?" Rick asked. "The confirmation." The drill went into the ground at Emma's specified location 4 days after her presentation. 4 days wasn't impatience. It was the minimum time required to position equipment, prepare the drilling plan, and implement the engineering protocols that Oak Island's particular challenges always demanded. The team's lead engineer had spent those 4 days doing something he would later describe as the most intensive pre-drill analysis of his career, essentially running every piece of subsurface data the team possessed through the lens of Emma's location to stress test whether the geological evidence was consistent with what her historical methodology had predicted. It was comprehensive, specifically in ways that went beyond the single anomaly the team had already identified. The GPR data, re-examined with the precise location in mind, showed subsurface features at depth that resolved into something coherent when you knew exactly where to look. The geometry of a constructed space, visible in retrospect in data that had been collected without knowing what it was imaging. "She's right," the engineer told Rick the night before drilling began. "I went into this skeptically. I'm a scientist and she's a historian, and the idea that 400-year-old cipher systems and astronomical alignments could produce an exact drilling location felt like, I'll be honest, it felt like the kind of thing I usually dismiss." He spread his analysis on the table.